I'm Sarah Ranchler. I'm a quality assurance engineer and also the president of the Fremont Toastmasters Club at Tableau. In other words, I'm a quality-driven data nerd who enjoys public speaking. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce you to two Zen masters, Bridget Cogley and Josh Milligan. Great. Bridget and Josh are both Technion consultants, and you may have seen their work on Tableau Public. Bridget is an interpreter turned data scientist who blogs frequently at tableaufit.com. Her sense of humor and passion for data visualizations is undeniable. I especially enjoyed her blog titled Introvert's Guide to Tableau Conference, which gives you some great tips on how to navigate this craziness that is TC. Looking forward to her bringing her self-described big hair and bad jokes to this session today. Also, I had the pleasure of sitting next to Josh last year at Tableau Doctor, and I can personally vouch that his data visualization skills are top-notch. He's the author of a book called Learning Tableau, which is one of the most critically acclaimed books that brings value to users of all skill levels. He seems to add endless value to our community. If you haven't been to vizpainter.com, go and check out his vizzes, which he has everything from doing tic-tac-toe in Tableau to visualizing the changing shapes of history by mapping out how our country looked through time. Today, they're here to share techniques on how to mold perfect data structures. Their session today is called Data Play-Doh, How to Shape Your Data for Success and Use Poorly Shaped Data when you have to. Join me in welcoming them with some glitter Play-Doh and a warm round of applause.
Thank you. And I'll give you a hug. So thank you guys for coming. So I'm Bridget Cogley. I am with Technion Data Solutions. I get to work with the delightful and wonderful Joshua Milligan. If you can't get enough of him, he has an arcade, people, and it's not even too far from this room. That's just cool. So the other thing is, yes, I am a Zen master. And finally, I paint in my spare time. So I'm trying to fight with him over the title of like Bob Ross. We're Bob Ross challenge. He also paints, so we'll have to have like a paint off at some point.
Yeah, I'll say that her paintings put mine to shame, so I won't fight over that title. So yeah, I'm Joshua Milligan. Also work at Technion Data Solutions. Love it as a consultant because I get to work with Tableau all day long, helping people see and understand their data. I'm also a Zen master, so that's a great honor. I did write the apparently critically acclaimed book.
It is phenomenal.
Thank you. The critical part may be more true than not.
Well, I critiqued it, so I was pretty critical, and I didn't have a lot to critique.
Yeah. And many of you who have been to sessions before or have seen my blog posts know that I'm a huge science fiction fan, or sci-fi if you prefer that. So Star Trek, Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica, anything with the word star in it. Not Dancing with the Stars. But that's not sci-fi, so that occasionally comes up and may come up again. If you don't like that, the exits are on either side of the room. All right, so what are we going to talk about today? You came here, and with a title like Data Play-Doh, you may have wondered, what in the world are we talking about? Well, we're going to talk about how you can mold and shape your data to get the analysis done that you need to do. So we're going to talk about where data comes from, how we manage it, and then we'll get into what does shape actually have to do with it. We'll talk about why does it matter what shape the data's in. And finally, we'll give some examples of how you can shape your data so that you can ask the questions and get the answers that you actually need.
So the first question, and probably the most important, is where does your data come from? And I'm just going to go ahead, show of hands. How many of you know where your data actually comes from? Have you seen? Okay, I'm hearing data store. Have you seen? Huh? Yeah. Superstore. So where does data come from? So let's really look at this. And it comes from everywhere. So how many of you have actually seen the application, not the database, but the application that generates your data? How many of you have seen it with your own eyes? The thing that people input the data into. Not the data warehouse, the thing people input data into. Perfect. And so you understand what that looks like. So what is a row, or how is a row generated, or how is data created, and what generates that? How many of you work in a hospital? Anybody? Hospital? Hospital? Couple hospitals? Man, I don't have a lot of hospital people. How about retail? Do I got retail people here? Okay, I got some retail people. What else am I missing? Come on. What? Marketing. Do I have marketers here? Google, something, yes. Okay, so as you think about what makes one row of your data, maybe it's an interaction, maybe it's you're getting this data and you're purchasing it. So thinking about kind of where this data comes from, the origin of the data. And so probably the best quote I saw was from IEO conference, and it's basically if you've not considered the collection process, how that data is actually gathered and taken in, you've not considered the data. And so I can't stress that point enough. The other thing, how many of you guys have what I like to call, and I've heard called, Excel spread marks? Anybody? Come on, okay, come on. Let's all raise our hand. We all have them. Let's be real. We all have some data somewhere in Excel. We also have the oral history of like, okay, I know this business rule. You take this item and this item and this item, and okay, we got this data and this guy, and you glom it together, and that is Play-Doh. But this is glitter Play-Doh, and this is regular Play-Doh. So we all have that oral history of what makes what. So that is kind of where we get our data from. It really does come from absolutely everywhere. If you've got a cell phone, my friends, you are contributing to the mass amount of data we make every day, whether that be your steps, whether that be you're standing still, whether you're making phone calls, texting, or Facebooking or tweeting, this chick is too much. So what generates data when you are looking at shopping? You've got visits. Maybe it's a site and you've got visits there. Maybe it's a purchase. It's a check-in. How many of you have checked in here? Should be everybody, unless you like stealthed in through a door. I checked in. I was so happy. I'm like, I'm speaking and I checked in. Okay. So space and movement. Do you realize that there is an RFID tag? So you guys are being tracked right now. How do I know this? Because I've done this. I have tracked people and like seen, okay, you're here. Oh, where are the bodies? Where's the heat map of the bodies? So you guys are contributing to lots of data just by moving about. If you've worked in a hospital, you're tracking patient beds. Okay, patient was in emergency room. We're moving them over to ICU. That is space and movement. So we're tracking you. How many of you have a newer car? Nice new car? Come on, nice new car, smart car, electric brakes. Guess what? You're also sending your speed off to somebody. So everybody knows how fast you're going. Your insurance company knows how fast you're going. Thank you, thank you. And then also demographic indicators. How many of you slice and dice data by what people are? Ages, background, something, anything, but it should be almost all of you. And then interactions. So how are we interacting? I'm up here, I'm presenting. This is an interaction. We've got all kinds of interactions. You're leaning over to your neighbor going, oh my goodness, what did I sign up for? That's an interaction.
All right, so how do we then manage our data? We've captured it, we've tracked it, we've generated it. How do we manage it? Who in here uses a database? All right, I should see every hand. The one question I got wrong in college in my computer science database class was, is a file system, a file cabinet with folders in it, is it a database? I said no. Turns out it is. We all use databases, but we usually think of databases like these. How many of you use SQL Server? All right. Lots and lots of you. How many of you use a database in the cloud? So maybe something like Amazon Redshift or Google BigQuery, something like that. So
Snowflake.
Yeah, Snowflake. Snowflake is a great one. Yeah, I think if I had asked that even last year or the year before, I wouldn't have seen very many hands there. So we all know about keeping our data, managing it in databases, but the story gets a little bit deeper than just that.
So how do we manage our data? And so my ideal format is low level. I want to understand the world, every interaction at the time. If I'm a Tableau analyst, I want it all. How many of you guys want all the data? All the data. How many of you will wreck your system if you get all the data? A few hands, yes. So you guys are probably working with roll-ups. And so you can't explore life and everything. You get a limited answer. But you can work with roll-ups. You can kind of figure out, okay, this is what I'm doing here by year level, by this level, however you choose to roll up your data. Now, the worst kind of format that I get, the one that makes me sit down and cry, does anybody here work for Pew Research Center? Do I see any hands? Joshua, do you see any hands? I'm not going to get strangled. Okay. Love their analysis. I can't work with their data because it's 99 columns and a dimension ain't one. So what I'm trying to find is data with a little bit more variety, a little bit more ability to analyze the data. So you've got your wide and shallow data. We'll talk about this a bit more. Anybody use SPSS? You probably celebrated when you got 99 columns and a dimension ain't one. D3, same kind of thing. And then what Tableau likes is that narrow and long. How many of you guys like long data? Awesome.
Yeah, and we'll get into that because we're going to talk about what does shape actually have to do with it.
I really want to sing right now. What does shape have to do with it? Okay.
All right, thanks.
Nobody's in on that one. Okay.
Everything. It has everything to do with it because the shape will determine what you can do in Tableau, what's easy, what's hard, what's quote-unquote impossible. Now we can always hack things, but there really are some things that are impossible when you get certain shapes of data. And most importantly, it will dictate the types of questions that you can ask and answer. We'll see an example of that here in just a little bit. So it has everything to do with it. What's the easy or ideal shape of data? Well, we talked about how it's tall. We'll see what that actually means. It's transactional. So when you have a patient visit a hospital and that's a transaction, you're capturing a record of data. Or when they're moved from room to room, that's another record of data. So you're getting these records that actually mean something. Lots of dimensions because we all love to slice and dice that data. That's how we do our analysis and get meaning out of it. How many of you know what a star schema is? All right, so quite a few, and then quite a few who don't. So if you work with data warehouses or data marts, you're probably familiar with this kind of a structure where you have a central fact table, which has your measures in it, and then dimensions in a star structure around that. It's a great structure for Tableau. Tableau loves that because, once again, your data is at a meaningful level of detail dictated by that fact table. And then a natural grain. Once again, just having those rows of data actually mean something, that's great. So here's an example of what we mean when we say tall versus wide. So you can see there on the left, tall, on the right is wide. And what's going on? What's the difference? Year. So year on the left is a dimension, and then population is the measure. So we're measuring things per country, per year. That's a great shape for the data. It's natural because I only have one measure. The right really truly only has one measure. It's still just population, but in that case, the data has multiple columns for that measure. Anytime you have a data set where you have multiple columns that represent the same measure, you know you're in trouble. You've got a wide data set. You need to get it into a tall data set if possible. Otherwise, you're going to run into problems. In fact, let's take a look at the issues that we might have.
Okay, so who came here to see PowerPoint slides? Awesome! Okay, you two, I'm going to disappoint you. Okay, who came here to see Tableau in its glory? Okay, I am going to show you guys a chart. Okay, and so it has my favorite thing out there. We are looking at television shows. Who here watches TV? Who here doesn't watch TV? Okay, you are my people. So my favorite thing is you've got ratings and you've got populations and you're trying to analyze this data. Has anybody here worked with Nielsen data? It's a wreck, right? You get Nielsen data, it just comes in and it's an absolute train wreck. So Alteryx did this really nice, handy exercise where they cleaned up the data and said, this is ready for analysis. Can anybody spot the issues? Anybody? Takers, takers. What do we have going on here? I've got code, I've got content name, I've got date, schedule, time, and then in measures, I've got these very cryptic names. Have any of you worked with these cryptic names before? Anybody in the media industry? Okay, so close your ears. I'm going to botch this. They're all targets. Okay, so I've got AQH, and so this is kind of your average quarter hour. We could call this 15 minutes. So you set somebody in a room, they watch a TV show for 15 minutes, and I'm saying for 12 plus. So this is 12 plus age, by the way, people. So if I have a 12-year-old, anybody is watching this show, this is kind of what they're how many people, and then the rating. And then I've got my target group, 25 to 54. So I've got all these measures. I've decryptified them now, so I know I'm dealing with population and rating. This will make sense. I'm also dealing with AQH, so average quarter hour, 15 minutes, and then I'm dealing with the total show. Now, because I have to be creative, I had these terrible names before. We have beefs and briefs. Anybody like legal comedies? Suits? Anybody? Man, tough crowd. I've got celebrity plus hobby equals reality TV. Because that seems to be the formula, right? Get a little dancing, get a little celebrity, boom, you have a reality show. Final piece, precocious kids and unwitting adults. This is like your family comedy, right? So what show is doing better? Can anybody tell? Is it easy to tell? Kind of hard to tell. Beefs and Briefs is the winner, but it's kind of hard to do anything with this, right? You can't really do much with the analysis. I can't compare quarter hour versus hour. I can't move these things around, and I really can't make a dashboard, can I? Can I make a dashboard? Have anybody here made a dead-end dashboard? You know, it's that dashboard you put together and there's nothing else you can do with it. There are no more questions because the data won't let you. Anybody? I've had this a million times. So I don't know how you guys haven't, but I want your data. So how do we fix this problem? So let's again just look at how many measures we have, how many dimensions, which one has more, dimensions or measures? Measures, okay. So we know that that's not ideal. Moving on to something that looks different. So now I have code, I have content name, I have date, I have a new field called demographic. And if I describe that field, it's 12 plus, pretty much everybody, and then 25 to 54 adults. And then I've also reshaped this, so then I've got type of person. Describe on that, and I can see here's the average quarter hour, so this is the group we sat in the room and just kind of let them watch it for 15 minutes versus everybody, and saw the whole thing. So now I've divided this out, and I can actually do stuff with this. I can move stuff around, I can replicate what I had, I can put my demographic up here. I can really look at this data, and I could even make a dashboard. I can make a nice cascading logic dashboard. So this is kind of your first look at Tableau and how we shape our data. And you'll notice I have population and rating. So right now I'm only looking at rating. If I put population out here, I can do a lot more with this, right? Do we have a preference? Would you rather the first or the second? Is lens A better or B? B, excellent. All right, we are on a roll. Okay, so unfortunately, I'm sending you guys back to PowerPoint. Whoop, whoop, PowerPoint.
Just for a little bit. So you see that Shape does actually make a determination on what kinds of analysis you can do. So the next question is okay, I've got this data. It's not in a great shape. What can I do about it? Well, we're going to take that data and we're going to shape it just like we would Play-Doh, however we want. We're going to reshape it. We're going to do it right in Tableau. Now, I know that there are other tools, but this is the Tableau conference, so we're going to look at Tableau. And how many of you are excited about Maestro?
Woo!
I am too. That is a game changer. But for now, let's think about what we can do with just Tableau. And it turns out we can do quite a bit.
So the first question is, what data do I need? And so when you look at data, you're like, okay, so for example, recently we had the Iron Viz. I was not the winner, but what I wanted to do was build an application. I wanted to say, okay, here's the Columbus Zoo. What do we have at the Columbus Zoo? We have animals, we have locations. And then lastly, I want to do something fun with this. So I want to track my visits. How many of you guys have tracked your visits to a zoo? Anybody? Or am I really seriously like nerdy? Okay, taking my nerd card and going over here. Anywho, so I made this dashboard. My focus was I've got the animals, what are they, where are they, and then of course I've got a 5-year-old and I am a 5-year-old. Gamification. So did I see the animal? Was the animal MIA? Because they do this weird thing, they take them for a bath. And so then they're not there. Well, I want to log this and complain about it. And then finally, I want to be able to group them and maybe even kind of have a fun game. So I can say, okay, I saw all the animals in Australia. Maybe, maybe. And so this is the dashboard I made. So you can kind of see that down at the bottom. It is live out on Tableau Public. And it is made for a phone. So if you guys want to ignore me, tune out, go to my Tableau Public. It is out there and you can play with it. So I've got the animals. I pulled that down from the zoo website. It came in JSON. How many of you have worked with JSON? So Tableau now reads JSON. I had to scrape it in JSON, and so I had the animals. How many of you have played with Google? I figure everybody's hand is going to go up on this one. Google offers this really cool thing called Google Earth, and I love it because you can go in and you can make all these shapes, and it's so much fun. And so I went on Google Earth, and I made my custom shapes. And then lastly, I wanted to find a way to log my visits, so I made a survey. How many of you have made a survey in Google? Guess what? You guys can embed this in Tableau. So what does this look like? So you can actually see where I made data. So I went on Google and I made the shapes. And then I said, OK, here's my 2 different shapes. So you can actually see I've got 2 different things. So in the blue is the region, which is that big green shape up at the top. And then the purple is actually the exhibits. And so I went and made points for each item. And then I took all of this and I joined it in Tableau. So Tableau now reads not just polygons, but spatial lines and everything else. So I took this and I joined it twice. Why in the world would I join it twice? It's the same data set and I joined it twice. And partly I joined one on region and then I joined the other on exhibit. So I had 2 different fields. I said the region, it goes to name, and then the exhibit, I did a nice calculation. How many of you knew that you can do a calculation right at your join level? I didn't. So you guys are way smarter than me. So I was really pleased to find that. So then lastly, kind of in that black box, I wanted to kind of make this nice little constellation of I've got my animals, I'm going to log my animal by survey, and I'm going to put that right in Google Sheets. And then that's going to go in Tableau. Now, how many of you know that Tableau Public refreshes from Google Sheets every day? That is so cool to me. So I can actually write back. I can actually use Tableau and write to Google Sheets, and every day it refreshes, which is just mind-blowing to me. It doesn't take much. I mean, Play-Doh, Google Sheets, I'm happy. And so I have this nice little, the survey feeds the data, and I keep growing my data set. Really cool to me. So again, just by thinking about, okay, I have this data, I could have tried to split it up. So I could make 2 KML files, or I can just say, you know, I'm going to do a left join and make sure that I've got everything pulling in the way I want it.
All right. Are you going to show the end product?
Am I going to show the end product? I guess I should, shouldn't I? Because we came here to see Tableau.
And it's really cool.
And it's really cool. I pay him, by the way. So here is the nice dashboard. And we can even go in presentation view so it looks like a real mobile app. And I would put my name, and I'm going to log in. And of course, they say never type while you're presenting. So naturally, I type while I'm presenting. I hit the login button, and I log in, and I see this on my phone. I've got regions, and I can also see before where I've got 21 logged visits. I've got 0 badges collected. And I'm going to just check out Asia. And I think the tiger is really cool. You can see we're off to the side. This is not visible on your phone, but I've got Google Sheets. Well, unfortunately, my tiger is taking a bath. Now, I'm a little sad. You can also see where the region is noted, so you can see where he is in the region. He's been logged, and I can go back to animals and back to my zones, or maybe I want to check out another animal. But I really want to check and see where I am from a badge level. So I can kind of say, OK, here's my badges. I haven't collected any today, but maybe if I go to logged visits, I can figure out what I'm missing. So again, just kind of a fun way to play with data. And yes, I do use this. I obviously have not seen all the animals because they've been taking a bath. Little resentful, very clean animals. I just don't get to see them.
All right. Well, that is way cooler than my example.
I disagree. I love this example. Where was this example when I needed it?
Yeah. Well, because here we get really practical. How many of you work with data sets where you're working with dates? Good, good, most of you. And those of you who aren't, why not?
I want to know what data doesn't have dates.
It's possible, but most would. Let's say that you have a data set that looks something like this. Here we have a data set that is one record per patient in the hospital, and we have a couple of dates. We have the admit date and the discharge date. Now, this is actually a very decent data set. We talked about the row level, the transactional level, that it makes sense. This makes sense, one record per patient. It also doesn't have one measure split up over multiple columns. So from that standpoint, I would say this is a good data set. But there are certain types of analysis that are going to be difficult in this data set. And there are other types that are going to be relatively easy. For example, if I wanted to determine the length of stay in the hospital, that's an easy calculation. It's the difference between the two dates, and I can do that at a row level. That's great. If I want to create a Gantt chart, that type of visualization, I can do that. But what would happen if I took that data set and I wanted to see the number of patients in the hospital on any given day? Now I've got a question that I immediately have a hard time answering because I don't even know which of these two dates to drag out onto the visualization. Do I do the admit date? I could bring that out here. And I could select the date type that I wanted. So maybe if I look at it by day, we've got something like this. The problem is that I get the individual dates. Okay, so I might try a different date type, maybe a date value at the day level. That's maybe a little bit nicer, and I could say, well, the number of records or the number of patients. Line chart's very problematic here because it connects things that are actually disjointed, so a bar chart might be better. But this isn't the number of patients in the hospital on a given day. This is the number of patients admitted to the hospital on that day. And I could do something similar with the discharge date and see how many patients were discharged on a given day. And if I really wanted to get fancy here in Tableau, I could maybe use some table calculations and carry the values across the table and add and subtract. And ultimately, I might be able to answer my question, but it's going to be very messy. It's going to be pretty brittle because anything else that I add in there might break that table calculation. And it's just not an easy question to answer. But what if I reshaped that data? And I can do that. What I'm going to do is something that you can do with almost any data set. Because now that Tableau has cross-database joins, all you have to do is create the data that you need, join it together with the data that you already have. Even if your data is in SQL Server, somewhere on the cloud, this would work for any of that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create just a little bit of a framework for this data. So I'm going to come in here and create just a date column. All of my patients in this example are in December of 2016, so I'm just going to fill out that month. And I'm just going to create one record for every day that I want to show. So we'll go down here until we get to the end of the month. There we go. So that's all of December. I will save my data now and go back to Tableau. So now what I'm going to do, so I'll clear this sheet so we don't break it when we come back, but I'm going to edit the data source. And right here in Tableau on the data connection screen, I'm going to take that new sheet that I created, and I'm going to join that with the data that I already have. So bring in sheet 1, which is all of my dates, and Tableau is going to ask me how I want to join that together. What I'm going to do is a cross-join. So I'm going to get a Cartesian product. How many of you have heard of Cartesian products? Okay, so a Cartesian product just means that for every row on one side, I'm going to get a row for every one on the other. So it's going to be a lot of rows. If you have a massive data set, this might not be the approach to take. But here, I'm just going to join it together with a join clause, a calculation, and I'm just going to join 1 on this side with 1 on this side. And every row is going to be joined with every row. And that means that I have patients with an admit date, a discharge date, and then the actual date that I really care about, except that in some cases, I have records that are meaningless. Here, David's great because the 1st of December falls between the admit and the discharge, but Solomon didn't come in until the 3rd, so December 1st is a meaningless record for me. I'm going to get rid of those by creating a calculation. So right here in the data connection screen, create a calculated field. And I'm going to say I only care about cases where the patient is in the hospital. And that is where the date is at least the admit date and not past the discharge date. So in cases where that calculation is true, I want to keep those rows. In all other cases where it's false, I'm going to get rid of those, and so I'll do that right here on the data connection screen with a filter. So up here in the upper right, I'll click Add a Filter. I'll add that patient in hospital calculation that I just created, and I'm only going to keep the true ones. Say OK. And now I only have cases where that date is a meaningful value. The record means that the patient was in the hospital. And now if I go to create a visualization, now I've actually got a date that's meaningful. I can take that date, put that up here on columns. If I right-click and drag, so holding down the mouse key, then Tableau asks me what kind of date value or part I want to use here. I'll just use the day part or the day value. And you can see now I've got a mark for every day. And if I take my number of records, that then is the number of patients in the hospital on any given day.
I cannot tell you the number of times I could have used this.
All right, so if you like that example, let's look at the next one. How many of you work in an organization where there's some sort of a hierarchical structure? Good. I've actually heard that there are some organizations out there that don't. I don't believe it. How many of you work in an organization that has a structure that looks something like this? All right. This session is being recorded. Your boss now knows that you think that you work in an organization full of evil people who belong to the dark side. Fortunately, I think the cameras are pointed this way. Yeah, hopefully not quite like this. But you probably do have hierarchies. And sometimes you see these hierarchies in the data, and it might look something like what's up here in the upper left, where you have some sort of an identity field, and then the actual person, and then a foreign key that points back to that identity field. Now, that doesn't sound like that much fun to work with. And in fact, if I come into Tableau and I look at that kind of a data set, I'm actually going to probably get kind of frustrated. So let's bring in that hierarchy. And if I look at that hierarchy, that's what I have. I have a little bit of other data here. But when I look at something like this, I can look at the person, and I can get a list of all the people in the organization. I could bring out some of the additional information, and I could sort of see who they report to using this reports to field. Well, that's wonderful, so I can rebuild what I originally saw, but that's not helpful at all. I don't have any ability here to build out any kind of hierarchy with this data set. But what would happen if I restructured it just a bit? So let's edit that data source. And what I'm going to do now is, instead of cross-joining with some other data or something like that, now I'm going to self-join. So I've got my list of imperials here, my list of people, but I can take that same sheet and join it to itself. So if I do that, I'm going to do a left join just so I make sure I get everybody. But I can do that a couple of different ways. One way is to say, who's that ID, and then who reports to that person. So I'll take that reports to field and join it that way. Now I'm going to get a data set that contains a list of underlings. So this is who reports to them. And if I do it one more time, I can do it the other way. So once again, we'll do a left join. Now I'll take who do they report to. So reports to the ID field, and that becomes a list of superiors. And it's possible, I heard somebody say no. Maybe I got it wrong. Moment of self-doubt. Let's check. So I take superiors. And then I take the actual person. And we take a look at that. That looks good. I have the superior. I have the person who reports to them. And then I could go and do the same thing with the underling. Now, if I really want to get fancy, I could take a data set like that and turn it into a dashboard like this. And so using the power of Tableau with that data set and some actions on a dashboard, now I have the ability to click and navigate that hierarchy just by clicking on that individual. And I can see who it is, or I could even select my favorite Star Wars character and see where they fit within that hierarchy.
So then the final piece is kind of that filling in holes. So we've seen a couple different ways to do it. I decided to also do another viz for Iron Viz. You're seeing a trend here, right? It's all about Iron Viz with me. You've got the practical and the impractical. And so what I wanted to do was look at cinematography. How many of you guys like movies? So how dorky can we be about movies? Have anyone considered like film cutting? Like how is the film cut, the camera angles, and this and that, the mechanics of it? Has anyone considered that? So there is a site called Cinemetrics, and it has this data, so you can actually look and see, like, here's the film cuts, here's how long a shot is. So it's like you come in and you pan in, and that is the shot. And so, you know, I had to look into this more. So for Iron Viz, it was a movie-themed data set. And so I looked up Cinemetrics, I found this, and so you've got kind of a summary, high level, here's about the movie, then here's each individual cut. It gives you all this detail about the cut. Natural airs and tranced, and so that made my Cinemetrics data. Well, the problem was some of these had IMDb data, and some of them didn't. So I did go ahead and I went out to Alteryx. I'm not going to show that part, but I went ahead and I scraped all this data, and then I did this nice little script to get my data. So this is kind of my complete data. And that was my Cinemetrics example. I'm going to kind of show you what this looks like from an end result. And so I wanted to make this. I could be really dorky and show you the YouTube video, but I figure you guys can go out online. Or if we've got the time, I don't know if we've got the time.
Go for it.
I can show, okay. So this is the magic of Tableau. So some people make movies about Tableau, and an error occurred. Ouch. That was so anticlimactic. That was just setting myself up to fail. But we can look at this and we can kind of explore the data. So that was the beauty of pulling in all this data. So that is kind of this dashboard. It is out there. But what I did ultimately was I took each individual row, and then I pulled in the low-level data, and I did the calculations there. So that was kind of that data, and then finally pulled in IMDb so I could analyze things by director or other little interesting tidbits.
All right, so just a quick overview of what we've looked at, and what's the takeaway? Really, it's a matter of taking away the fact that you can shape your data to do whatever kind of analysis you want, whether it's competing to get into the Iron Viz, or it's working with your organizational data. Either way, look at your data as something that you can shape to do the analysis that you want. You can fill it in, you can join it, you can pivot it, you can unpivot it, and just consider all the different ways that you can work with your data.
And I would say the question is, what are you trying to do? You can't go any lower than the data you have. So looking at the data, for example, Joshua needed to see this daily, and he wasn't able to, so he made that data. So that's one thing. It's kind of figuring out what is your function, so that way you can create the form. The other thing is just kind of that improv, like what does this look like? One of the things that I saw during the Maestro demo was, okay, well, what does this look like? What next? What next? What next? And so a lot of times when I'm doing this, it's like, okay, I've got it this way, does it work? You know, and so you kind of try this and play with this. Okay, no, this isn't working. I'm going to save this work, and I'm going to make a new data source and try what next with that. That's the beauty of, I think, Maestro when it comes out, because you are able to say, well, what next? I'm going to take this and do that. And you saw how that person did that.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to Maestro, but I'm excited about what you can do in Tableau even right now when it comes to shaping your data. We've got a little bit of time for questions, but before I forget, I'm going to remind you to fill out the session survey with a reminder, too, that we do have free Play-Doh for anyone who gives us the highest ratings, because there's not enough for all of you.
I did not expect a big crowd. I figured, you know, the Play-Doh would be the draw, maybe Joshua, because he's a nice guy, but, you know, Play-Doh.
But after we answer a few questions and we wrap things up, feel free to come up here, grab some Play-Doh. If you're one of the first people up here, we've got some cards, too. Feel free to take that. Do we have any questions? All right, he's making his way to the microphone. What am I doing tomorrow night? There's a data night out, I hear. What am I doing before that? I am doing Iron Viz. Because
in your hierarchy viz, how did you draw the lines between to make the org chart for the Empire?
Oh yeah, so I cheated on that one. The original one that you saw here. I did that in PowerPoint and grabbed a screenshot and plopped it on the dashboard.
Play-Doh!
But you know what?
Hey, wait, you got to come up here and get Play-Doh. You asked a question. You get Play-Doh first.
Yeah. As much as you should feel free to shape your data, feel free to shape your dashboards using whatever tools you want as well.
No joke. Thank you so much.
In your example where you used the 1 = 1 for the Cartesian join, what would you recommend if you have, say, hundreds of thousands of rows of data on each side?
Yeah, so if you have hundreds of thousands, millions of records, and it just isn't feasible to do that Cartesian join, you could look at can you filter it to get down to a reasonable data set. That may be a possibility. But otherwise, you may have to look at doing that in the database and writing a custom SQL script that does it in a more elegant way than a Cartesian join. So in Tableau, my joins are limited to equal statements, but if you could have done a greater than or equal to or less than or equal to right there in Tableau, you could have done it. Definitely in a custom SQL statement, you can do that.
All right, thanks.
You're welcome. You want to grab some Play-Doh?
Play-Doh. Play-Doh.
Yeah.
We even have green. Green makes me excited. I like green.
Any other questions? All right. Okay, so the question was membership data. The members can go in and out of various statuses. And so how would you work with that? So yeah, the first thing I would ask myself is what kind of analysis do I want to do? Am I looking for over time, what status were they? I'm going to probably have to capture that then in the data. And I'm going to have to manage those snapshots over time. If I just care about what status they are now, then I could probably easily capture that from the transactional system. Any other thoughts, Bridget?
I think you've got a lovely blog post about snapshot data. I know I've used it in the past where you've kind of talked about here's the snapshot pulling it in. And so I would say probably looking at that as well. And that's a lovely archive that you've got out there.
Yeah. All right.
If I were trying to work on a project where I was doing some like blended data, you showed some examples where you kind of took what you were doing with joining your tables and you applied that calculated field and you used a filter to keep it out. Sometimes, like, I might have like a custom SQL query, for example, that searches through, let's say, 50 million records to find 50,000 records. Now, once I've done that, to get the reporting needs I want, I kind of, what I've found so far is I need to do some data blending. So I'll need that superset, and I'll need to run that query again, but at a less granular level to build like 3 or 4 data sources. The thing is, I don't like having to run a 10-minute query 10 times. I'd rather run that 10-minute query once and then be able to use that data set to make my other data sets at a less granular level. After I've already published that first thing to Tableau server, can I do what you did? Like, take that same data set and create it into 3 different data sets, just less granular ones, or do I have to keep building those data sources with my SQL?
Okay, so I'm going to try to restate that, and but we may have to take that one offline. What I heard you say was just like I added a filter there, you're writing a custom SQL query that's also filtering a data set, and then you're blending that with data sets at different levels of detail. And so your question is can you create data sources that you would publish once instead of having to do that every single time? I think the answer is yes, but I think I'd have to look at that specifically to see if there's complications.
And I would also say Tableau does offer a roll-up, so you can extract your data once, so you can take it, here's the low level, and then kind of take and make a separate dashboard almost. So copy, paste, make a new dashboard, and then hide those items that you don't want, roll your extract up to that level. The other thing, again, depending on your data and what you're trying to do, level of detail calculations may also be the item that you would want. Again, so that might be another opportunity.
All right, any more last-minute questions?
Now keep in mind, you guys have sat through this session, a lot of people have left, so you have less competition for the Play-Doh.
All right, if there are no more questions, we will wrap it up there. Please remember to fill out the surveys, and please come up and grab Play-Doh before your neighbor does.